From Anthony Joshua fading into irrelevance, to people forgetting who Tito Ortiz was, here are fighters no one cares about anymore. And to kick proceedings off, how about Anthony Joshua? Surprised to see him on the list? Let me ask you a question, and be honest about it. Did you know he had a fight earlier this month? Exactly! Luckily for Joshua, he didn't completely lose his touch along with his fans, because he managed to get back to winning ways after a unanimous decision over Jermaine Franklin. But no matter what way you look at it, the facts are the same. Joshua's stock has fallen. Big time. He's just not an important name in the boxing industry. And that's mainly because of those back-to-back losses to Alexander Usyk. Of course, the reaction to that final defeat played a big part too. Either way, Joshua's just not the biggest name in the industry anymore, and he's got only himself to blame. In fact, his 2 losses to Usyk weren't the only reason for people not caring about him anymore. He's been on the downward trajectory for quite some time now. Say what you want, but boxing is very much a statistic and zero-driven sport. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean that if you have the 0 next to your record, the 0 that signifies that you've never lost a fight, you'll be relevant in boxing. The minute you break that duck, you're done out here. And while Joshua was lucky to land that fight against Usyk, and in fact, even luckier that he got a rematch after losing a unanimous decision, he's kind of lost his way in the combat world. Don't believe me? Just look at his last 6 fights. 3 losses and 3 wins. That's horrific. Can you ever expect someone like Tyson Fury or Alexander Usyk to go down that route? No chance. They'd call it a day long before they actually lose a fight, and in case they do lose one, they'll know better to put things right immediately. If they lose twice to someone, they'd do the noble thing and hang up the gloves, saying goodbye to the sport, which might be a controversial opinion, but many believe is what Joshua should have done too. He hinted at retirement and then ended up agreeing to a fight against Franklin, not to mention the massive pay cut he took just to prove that he can still fight at this level. But it still wasn't pretty, was it? And I'm not the only one saying that. AJ himself believes that he should have actually knocked out Franklin, yet he let the 989 assassin take him the distance? That doesn't reflect well on the kind of statement that Joshua was looking to make. And the fact that he acknowledges this himself showcases what he's thinking about right now, and it's not pretty. If he loved the sport and wanted to keep boxing for the sake of it, you'd understand that, and probably respect that too. However, the way it looks like, right now, AJ's trying desperately to hang on to something that is a shadow of his glorious career. It would have done wonders for his legacy had he just retired after that Usyk loss. Instead, he's fading into irrelevance by fighting on a much smaller scale with relatively less on the line. That's why very few people tuned in to an AJ fight. Can you expect someone to say that back in 2019? No freaking way. He was the main man back then. Now though, a quick look to his posts and stories is all you need to know what boxing fans think of him. Fans really don't care about Joshua's next fight. Yeah, a week after his win over Franklin, AJ posted a story announcing that his next fight was scheduled for December. In the same story, he added that it's not ideal, but everything is part of a bigger picture. Nah, that reeks of desperation. If you buy into what the fans are saying, DAZN Boxing on Twitter reposted AJ's Insta story, and the replies were sad. Twitter user Tom J. McMahon replied, "Literally irrelevant." Another user, Adam Tynemouth92, noticed, "So much for fighting 3 times in a year. He fought 5 times in 5 years." Clearly, the fans aren't too happy and think he's super desperate here. Apparently, Eddie Hearn, the promoter, also hinted that AJ's looking to stay busy, and that's not a good reading for someone who's been the headline for that long. Unfortunately for Joshua, he's not the first fighter to become irrelevant, and he definitely won't be the last. Because, does anyone remember Tito Ortiz? Rings a bell, doesn't it? Well, he was UFC's OG bad boy, and boy did he know how to play that villain role. From a business point of view, he was a goldmine for Dana White in the UFC. He garnered so much interest that he brought tons of new eyes to the UFC and sold many more PPV fights. In fact, he brought that WWE showmanship to the UFC, and that led to the entertainment factor and trash talking becoming a major part of the promotion. Who can possibly forget how much of a potty mouth he became leading up to the fight against Ken Shamrock? Tito would go on to become the light heavyweight champion in the UFC. However, 17 years on, you'd be surprised to know that Ortiz is still an active fighter, but most people had have completely forgotten about him. In fact, he's been fighting for smaller promotions since his exit from the UFC, and is currently signed to the Combate Americas promotion while also being an active boxer. Although, boxing probably isn't his forte, because he's fought only once in his career, and suffered a knockout loss. But talking about boxing, who can forget Gennady Golovkin? The answer is everyone. GGG was absolutely elite during his prime. In fact, he's won a total of 42 fights in his career, and he was a former unified middleweight world champion. In fact, over the course of his career, he's lost fewer fights than AJ, yet rarely does anyone remember him. He was counted among the greats up until his loss in 2018, but eventually retained some of his titles a year later. But Golovkin just hasn't been able to regain that same level of success which made him unstoppable. Now, he's also running out of time, because he is 41, and there probably isn't a lot left in his career, although it would be nice to see if he can win another big fight before he calls it a day. Something that didn't work for the next name on the list, Amir Khan. Mostly known for scandalous headlines involving his love life, Amir Khan just wasn't able to reach the heights that he once did early into his career. The former unified light welterweight world champion didn't have a championship to his name since he lost one in 2012, which I have to say is a shame, because there was so much promise and potential, yet fans completely lost interest in Khan's career, and a lot of that was to do with his glass chin. Oh, and the fact that moving to the welterweight division was a disaster. Fortunately, Khan made the right decision after that and retired from the sport last year. Talking about unified world champions, the boxing world can be very unforgiving, which is why I'm willing to bet that you won't recognize Sergey Kovalev if you ever run into him. Talk about a fall from grace. The Russian superstar was nicknamed Crusher, and for good reason. He was absolutely phenomenal. Just before COVID struck, Kovalev was actually ranked as the second best light heavyweight in the world. But days later, the Crusher lost to Saul Alvarez, and since then, he just hasn't been the same boxer he once was. As a result, fans have completely forgotten what the Crusher was once capable of, which is the exact same trajectory that Andrei Arlovsky's career followed. Arlovsky, also known as the Pitbull, still holds the record for most wins in UFC heavyweight history, with 23. The 44-year-old is still in active MMA and remains contracted with the UFC. However, fans have mostly forgotten about him, mostly because his recent record isn't that great. He may have won 4 of his last 6 fights, but lost both the important ones to Tom Aspinall and Marcus Rogerio de Lima. That's everything on fighters that no one cares about anymore.